Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Hello, this is Brackley in Las Vegas.
And this is David, coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore area of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers. Well, welcome everyone to episode 140. We're back to the even numbers. And by the way, I'm sure you all figured this out, but every 5 episodes, we do an interview. And today's interview is with our wonderful friend that we have known forever and a real bigwig when it comes to designing, associate designing, and of course programming and designing consoles, Mr. Bobby Harrell. Hi, Bobby.
Hey, David, Steve, Brackley. Thanks very much for having me.
Welcome to the show, man.
Welcome to the show.
So, Bobby, I see you survived LDI. Any kind of revelations you gathered from being there?
You know what? It was a really good LDI this year. I actually didn't get to spend a whole lot of time going around to too many other booths. We were so busy on the floor at the Strand of Airlight booths. So lots of good products that we were showing, new little console coming out, a lot of new Verilight product moving into the systems market, the VL800 series, where we finally have an LED replacement for the VL5, called the VL5 LED wash. So lots of good stuff going on.
That's really great, man. I'm sorry I missed it, Bobby, but I was like eating really good food in Palermo.
Well,
so, instead of that crap in
it's
Las Vegas.
Hard to fault you for
but
that.
Yeah, it was. Ann was saying, "You're not going to be with us? Wouldn't you rather be with us in Las Vegas?" No, no way. I want to be eating good food,
Absolutely.
damn it.
We had lovely food in the cafeteria.
I bet the cafeteria was wonderful.
Not everybody may know who Bobby Harrell is. Brackley, you've got a bio there. Let's hear about.
Okay. This is also printed on our website, but as a lighting designer, associate designer, and programmer, Bobby Harrell has enjoyed numerous Broadway productions, including Spring Awakening, History Boys, Wild Party, Jackie Mason, Private Lives, to name a few. He's also done a number of off-Broadway shows. In addition, he has done shows for the Rattlestick Theater, Intar Theater, Soho Rep. In addition, there are productions with Lincoln Center Festival, Resident Ensemble Players, San Francisco Opera, Moscow Ballet, Fort Worth Opera, the Plaza Theater, Underman Theater, and more. In the industrial world, he has been production manager, lighting designer, and technical director for Mary Kay Cosmetics, J.P. Morgan, Campbell Soup, Sprint, Lighting Craft for Beechcraft and Canadian Air, and the National Business Aircraft Association, among others. He has taught master classes all over the world on lighting technology and working at the professional level in the theater. As Strand and Verilight's business development manager, Bobby enjoys interfacing with consultants, performing console training, and supporting the theatrical community as he travels the world in search of a great barbecue.
Whoa. Have you found one?
Oh, I find this stuff everywhere
You find
I go.
thousands of them.
You should write these down, man, because I love good barbecue. Hey, I got a couple of quick questions from that bio, Bobby.
Yeah.
First of all, you did the Jackie Mason show with Neil Jampoulis, right?
Well, Neil sort of did all of Jackie's shows, and there was one in particular that we did just as I was a grad student for Neil at the time, and he brought me to New York to do that. So,
well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And the other question was, Mary Kay, were you there during the famous or infamous Dove incident?
I did hear about that. I did hear about that.
One day we'll have to tell that story because it is one of the funniest things that ever happened in the theater. But I thought it was great. Anyway, so let's get on with the show. Why don't you tell us, how did you get started in this crazy business?
Well, in high school, I was performing, and everyone, when they graduated our high school, that everybody was sort of in the music side of things, doing choir and the musical productions, just went right into the local junior college. And we all were sort of doing musical theater. And actually, I was headed toward a music degree. About a year and a half into that, I just sort of took a look and said, well, you really either perform or you teach with a music degree. And I sort of didn't want to do that at the time. So I looked at my next love, which was theater, and had absolutely no idea what to do. But I knew SMU had a good program, and I just called them up, and I said, "Hi, I'm coming this fall." and they said, "Oh yeah." So I showed up with a few pictures of productions I'd worked on, a really ragtag portfolio and resume, and got in on an academic scholarship. Technically, I was on probation just because I didn't have a lot of theater experience at the time. So did my undergraduate work here, and then spent about 8 or 9 years doing production work based in Dallas, designing production work on these industrials, scenic coordination, technical direction, all of that. And like I said, about 8 or 9 years into it, I did a magic flute here at SMU, and it terrified me. It totally terrified me because I had sort of peaked and I couldn't take it any further, even though I knew it needed to go there. And I realized that I had a choice to make. And I thought about what I should best do. And I wound up meeting Neil Peter Jampoulos because he was in town doing a show at the Theater Center. And we got to talking, and I wound up applying for grad school and going out there. Spent the 3 years there, getting the master's with Neil. Then I went to work for San Francisco Opera because at that point, the only thing I really didn't have experience with was really large rep. And I sort of desperately wanted that. So the opera provided that for me for a couple of years, and then went to New York.
And Tom Munn was there, right? At the
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Tom was the resident. Tom was the resident.
That's fantastic.
A lot of great. They obviously bring in a lot of great designers. That's where I met Pat Collins and a lot of other people.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about SMU. I'm always trying to go back to try to figure out how you and I met. Were you an undergrad when I was a grad there? How did we meet?
Yeah, it was. I was an undergrad there, and I don't remember if you were going to school at the time or were just sort of still connected and involved. But it was during that time.
As long as you don't tell any stories about me, that's best that you don't remember.
I'll keep it clean, David.
You just said that's what got you to New York. How did you get there?
Well, there was, David, you brought up Jackie Mason, and it sort of all ties in together. When during my time at UCLA for grad school, where it was appropriate, I would just sort of trail Neil around and do productions. And he had just done a production of Electriths at the Seattle Opera. And right after that, we both had to go to New York because Jackie Mason was doing another Broadway show. So I sort of officially couldn't do it because I didn't have a card at the time. But Neil really wanted me to have the experience, so he had a New York assistant do the plot and get the show up, and then we both showed up, and I took over in the theater. So I get there, and we're playing. I'm pretty sure we were playing in the booth. I know it was one of the 5 remaining Hemp Houses that we were playing in. It was fairly, one of the smaller ones. And I walk in, having never really spent much time in New York, certainly never been inside a Broadway theater at that point. And Jackie Mason was he got his chops as a comic. So doing a scripted production was not really his strong suit, but they had a script and they had a production, and there was a video component to this. So they were putting this set up, and we're in a hemp house, and it wasn't until they got it on stage that they realized that they had built the projection wall to hold the screen for front projection when the show was being rear projected.
Oops.
So they had all these supports in the way. So the carpenter just took over, dropped this thing in the middle of the stage, and started rebuilding it while we're trying to, hang and focus. So now we get a big problem, right? We can't get that moving. Now, while that's going on, we had a 1 and a 1A electric that were maybe 6 inches apart. Now, the 1A electric only had 3 pipe ends on either end of it. And again, it's a hemp house, so, nothing exists, right? They had to bring in the pipe, they had to bring in everything. We got everything up, we got it at trim. And for those of you who don't know how to manage and deal with the lighting system in the hemp house, those ropes are going to stretch, right, as humidity changes. So once you set a trim, you have to do dead ties, right? You have to wire tie these things off so that the pipes don't move. So you generally do a dead tie center and one on the stage left end and one on the stage right end. So you have 3 per electric. Well, these 2 electrics are so close together that they mistakenly did the 2 center dead ties on the 1A electric. Now, this is only important because we had to change the trim. So Neil said, go get that taken care of. So get with the electrician or get the carpenter to deal with the fly and to send somebody up and do the dead ties, and then we got to bring this thing in. Well, they went through and undid the 3 dead ties, not knowing there was a 4th one. As soon as they start bringing the pipe in, it starts bending, and they bring it in enough that the thing breaks.
Oh, the pipe? The pipe breaks? Oh, my God.
The pipe breaks, and now both of these things are coming in.
Oh, my God.
On this arc, right? Just flush.
Like a big pendulum.
Exactly. So these 2 pendulums come in and they swing past each other, and luckily nobody was in the way and nobody got hurt. But so that was crisis number 2, right? Now, of course, they didn't have as much time as one needed to get this going, but we got the pipe fixed and got everything back up. And the next crisis was when Jackie's manager, who is his ex-wife, which means that tells you how well they get along together, she decides on the day of first audience that they have to reorder the script.
Oh, my God.
Because she's used to dealing with a stand-up comic.
Sure. No big deal.
And everybody, Neil, everyone was saying, guys, you can't do that. This is a Broadway show. We have an audience in 4 hours. You cannot do this. And Jackie and his manager, they went off screaming, and they came back in a few minutes and said, nope, we're going to reorder it. So the electrician who was running the board, it was on Obsession, running backstage, because of reputations, was terrified of Neil. And I don't know what happened. I don't know why, but he was very nervous about the whole thing. We had enough time to reorder Act 1 only before we had to start the show. So Neil looked at me and he said, you got this? And I said, sure. So they gave me a headset. I sat in the 4th row directly behind Walter Cronkite, and I reordered Act 2 blind while we were playing Act 1.
Wow.
Now, at the end of that, I thought that this is the way every Broadway show worked. And I was hooked. That was it. I had to have some more of this. And that's what made it happen for me.
So everything after that was a disappointment.
Completely. Absolutely.
Welcome to New York, Bobby. Well, that's really funny. Neil never told me that story, but that's really good. I'm going to tell him to listen to this episode. That's really great.
Okay, so I've got a question.
Yeah.
Was the show better once it was reordered?
I'm gonna have to say no.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to say no. I think it was a reaction and people thinking, well, this is Broadway, so we're gonna have to do something a little different. And I don't think it was the right
something
thing.
Dramatic.
But that's my opinion.
We got to do something dramatic because it's Broadway.
Okay, Bobby, let's talk about the Niagara Falls project.
Oh, sure. About 4 years ago, the Niagara Falls Illumination Society decided that they wanted to put out a request for quotation to replace the existing lighting system with LED. And about that time, there was a manufacturer, an LED lamp manufacturer called Stanley, not the tool company, different company, that they had a source. They do a lot of automotive stuff, and they had a source, and their rep was running around all over town or all over Canada, sort of trying to find a use for this source. And it turns out that the Niagara Falls project was going to be something that that was going to work for it. So they decided that the Niagara Falls Illumination Society decided that in order to replace it, they had to provide a solution that was not only color mixing, but provided double the lumen output that they currently had, and it was all currently like 20K xenon lamps and things like that. I think they had like 40 20K xenons sort of doing the existing system. So the designers at Mulvey and Benani, who were doing the project, sort of drew up a specification and started working with the manufacturer and doing testing. And they knew that they were going to have to project about 2,000 feet. So they did tests on lakes, on boat docks, so then shoot it across the lake and, test the lumen output and all of that. Now, one of our dealers, Scene Work, Ron Foley at Scene Work, got the contract for the control side, and he came to me asking about doing it with Neo. So we talked about the project and what it was going to entail, and engineered a system to do it. And what we needed was a little different or it's a little atypical because, number one, you have a control system that's rack mounted. That's all perfectly fine. But the gentlemen that operate it are, they're really not lighting professionals, right? They're sort of tour guides. They're actually retired railroad engineers. They're really sweet guys. But they didn't have a lot of experience with this, and they were not going to be running Neo, right? You couldn't train them to sort of run the lighting console. That just wasn't going to be in their comfort zone. So Neo has an app called My Interface where you can program whatever, buttons and sliders and images and backgrounds and effects and things, and just create this interface to be whatever you want it to. So we engineered these interfaces so that they have a 24-inch touchscreen that's just on the PC, one for the Canadian Falls and one for the American Falls. And everything's pre-recorded, and they've got static colors that they can go to. They have dynamic fades, and I programmed it so that you can meld those two together. So you can pick a particular dynamic fade and then decide what color you want it and just have it all mixed. There's also some pre-recorded things that they do. They will often turn a pre-recorded show on at midnight, and it might run until 1 a.m. if it's in the winter, until 2 a.m. if it's the summer, and then sort of the system shuts down on its own. But it's a mix of user operated, sort of busking and pre-recorded stuff. They also allow tourists to come in. They'll have busloads of tourists that'll come into the control room, and we built a special screen that just sort of gives them a half a dozen colors that they can play with, and then they get a little certificate that says, "Hi, I lit Niagara Falls."
I lit Niagara Falls. That's really funny. Exactly. So, Bobby, I have the next question. You are both a designer and a first-rate programmer. What does it take to succeed as a programmer capable of working on high-profile projects?
Well, I think I can tell you what works for me, and it may vary from individual to individual, but I think being a designer helps inform my programming, right? It allows me to have an eye instead of just a set of fingers that are doing the work. And there are some programmers there's some designers that I work with where we develop these relationships that we joke that, they say I can sort of finish their sentences. It's like we've been married for 30 years because I learn their style. I learn sort of where they go. And I'll just, start not jumping the gun, but just sort of getting to where we need to get as fast as possible. And I really enjoy doing that. And I've always felt that programming is my philosophy about it is there's programmers with a little p and programmers with a capital P. And the little p programmer is someone who can do 80% of what they need to do at the drop of a hat. But when they are sort of asked to sort of do something that they don't have a lot of experience with, everything sort of grinds to a halt while you sort of figure it out. And it's not necessarily a problem in the production. I mean, it might be and it might not be, but you just got to know that that's the level of programmer that you have. With a capital P programmer, there's no delay whatsoever, right? It's like they can jump right in and do something that they don't do very often just as quickly as it's something they do every day. So, my goal is there are 3 words that I never, ever want to say to a designer while I'm programming. And that's, give me a minute. Right? While they're talking, right, I want to be before they finish their sentence. If they're saying, I'm thinking we want to do something like this, and I just want to start typing. I want to get something going, and so that when they finish that sentence and take a breath, I can hit enter, and we can either have something to look at. It may not be right. It may be a big pile of crap, but at least there's something to comment.
A starting point. Exactly.
Yeah. Now, the other part of this is I really think a third of what I do is mostly therapists. You really have to understand the psychology and the emotions of what's going on at that table. And having been a designer, so sitting at the table, I totally get it. I totally get when you're in a hot seat, when the director's throwing things at you that you didn't quite expect. And, it's your name on the marquee, right? You're the one, it's your job. And it's my goal is to make it as simple for you as possible. So I have ways that I like to work, but I don't have ways that I force a designer to work, right? If they say, I'd like to set things up this way, and here's the way that I'm comfortable working, I feel it's my job to be malleable and to work the way they want to work.
Wow, that's really good. I mean, I've always believed that there are 2 critical people who could either make your show or destroy your show as a lighting designer. And those are the stage manager and the programmer. And I consider my programmers almost co-designers, because I learn a lot from the programmer, and the programmer, like what you were talking about, Bobby, you learn their style. After a while, after about probably 15 minutes of working with the new designer, you've got it figured out, right? And you really have to be sensitive.
No, absolutely. Oftentimes you do. But, you and I think we all know this, but there are times when how the stage manager functions affects how you program a show. So you're absolutely right, because there are times when they may not be able to call it exactly the way you need it called. I mean, I've seen stage managers that they're really great at a lot of things, but they're not that incredibly musical. And if you need something to happen on the upbeat, and they can only really think on the downbeat, it's like, okay, no problem, we'll take care of this, right? And so you can program around that stuff.
Let me ask a follow-up question here. So if I'm in high school or I'm in college and I think I'm going to be a programmer someday, is there a career path? Is there something they should be thinking about to get them to where you've gotten yourself?
Well, I think you need to think about what side of this production world you want to be a programmer for, right? Because there's the live event side, there's the theatrical side, the commercial part of that. There's the industrial side of things. So I think it really depends. One of the things that I think about this, because it's one of the things I wish I had done better as a young designer, and that's networking with producers and directors and things like that. So if you're thinking about programming, then you want to make your connection with designers. If you're thinking about designing, your connections with directors and producers. So I think it's all about that networking and the connections. And when you're given a shot and somebody will give you a shot, you better have the chops to back it up, right? Because if they're going to take a chance on you, you got to make them look good.
Would you recommend these young programmers to really get to know one console, or should they know a variety of consoles?
It's really amazing. The more you limit yourself to one console. In fact, I started to use the word stifle, and I think it's appropriate. I mean, I know some guys in New York that they got very comfortable on one particular desk several years ago. And, consoles change, right? Development changes, consoles change, the flavor of the month is going to change over several years. And because they stuck with one thing, that's all they're known for. And and I've seen those guys try and break out and do some other things, and it's really a bit of a struggle with them. So this is a situation where 1 + 1 = 3 or 4, right? If you know 2 desks, you can grab onto a third one pretty easily. It's so the more flexibility you have, the better off it is.
Yeah, I just did a show in L.A. that the programmer was an MA programmer, but we had a hog on the show. Mm-hmm. And the production company who supplied the programmer, they hired this guy. He said, "Hey, listen, I don't know the hog very well," but they hired him anyway, obviously. And he was very apologetic, but he learned it in about an hour. He was able to get it up to speed because he was a really smart guy. But that really does put you at a disadvantage if you don't know a lot of this, at least the main ones.
Right. Well, but in a case like that, at least you're talking about 2 sides of the same coin, right? They are both live event style desks. One of the things that I talk about a lot when I teach consoles is I want to teach you how the console thinks, right? I don't want to just teach you keystroke sequences, right? Because you're gonna forget, right? You're only gonna maintain so much of this teaching. So I want to teach you how it thinks. And luckily in MA and a hog, they have a lot of similarities in the way they think. So at least everybody, you in the production had that going for you. If you were going between an MA and an EOS or an EO or something else, then those are very theatrical style boards, which do think differently than the live event boards do.
Well, let's talk a little bit about consoles for a bit. What does it take to bring a new console to market?
Well, I think you first have to decide what your goal is, right? Who's the customer? Where are you? Because there's a very business application process that you got to go through and figure out, what's your market? How many you're going to sell? And once you decide that, that's going to help you understand the approach you're going to take. Now, we all know computer-generated consoles, they started out in 2 paths, right? There was the theatrical thinking console, and there's the live event thinking console. And they started out very, very differently, where a theatrical console really couldn't do moving lights very well when they first came out. And the moving light desk couldn't really do dimmer channels very well. And those worlds have gotten a whole lot closer together. And they're going to be, we could debate that. We could debate how far that's gone all weekend. But there are still differences in philosophy. When one hits the store button or the record button, what you're going to get, right? What's going to happen? So you got to figure out what your market is, what the approach is, and develop your specification, understand what the hardware needs to be, what your price point is, and lastly, understanding your market, right? Understanding the people that are using it and what they're going to do. Because if you're building a console into the school market, you got a wide range of people that are going to be using it, because the students are going to be able to grab onto it fairly quickly. But teachers, they don't. I have a lot of respect for teachers nowadays because they're so overworked. I just did one training earlier this week. It's the first time I had worked with a teacher that not only had the responsibility of every aspect of the production, was the theater teacher, but she was also the music teacher.
Wow.
And this woman had no time.
And that's more common than you think.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right, Brackley. It's, she was so overwhelmed. And I had such sympathy for her. It's like, okay, let's get you the basics now. We're going to separate this because we'll be able to get you so far today, and we're going to schedule a time where I can come back and do more, do more training at a later time. So, but yeah, you got to understand your market, figure out the feature set you need and set your schedule to get it out when you need to release the product.
And what time period is that? I mean, how long does it take from the very first conceptual meetings to actually being able to sell it? About 2 years, 3 years?
Well, if you are taking a team and starting from scratch, you're looking at a 2 to 3 year time frame. And I'm here to tell you that people that run businesses, they don't want to hear that.
You're not the first person on this show that has said that. We've had a lot of fixture designers and console designers basically saying the same thing. It's people get impatient.
Yeah, if you're telling a general manager of a manufacturing company that they're going to employ X number of programmers at this salary rate for this amount of time before you ever get a return on your investment, they're not happy at all.
That's true.
Let me ask a question without giving away any trade secrets. When you look in your kind of, I don't know, magic glass ball thing there, what's the holy grail? What's the console going to be 20, 25 years from now that everybody's working toward?
It's really interesting. I guess I have a couple of comments about that a little bit separate, but I remember having lots of conversations with Richard Pilbrow about consoles, and he would grab me and he would say, "Okay, Bobby, he's like, we have to get away from numbers, right? It's like numbers are there for translation purposes only. We don't need them. They just get in the way. We've got to just give me one big touch screen with this amazing graphical interface where I can just say I need this light in this position at the right size and the right color." And he just had these lofty aspirations of what he wanted this to be. But there's a reason we use numbers, right? Because they're mathematical, they're absolute, they're easy to translate and understand. So I've often thought about those dinners with Richard and what that utopian thing might be. And I don't know that I have an answer to it, but things are definitely getting more graphical, a lot more touch friendly. The other comment I was going to say is I've had the pleasure. I certainly don't know all the desks that are out there, but I have the pleasure of working on different desks, and there's absolutely no single desk that's the perfect console, right? They all have things that I love about them, that fast, easy to use, and then there's things about every console out there that is laborious and tedious and just difficult to do. But those things are all different, right? They're all different on every desk. So I'm not sure what the answer is. I just don't know that there's a silver bullet. But I think like a lot of industries, everybody just keeps working like we do to bring out new technology, new solutions, continue to work with the user base. As you get some solutions, you're going to think of ideas to work for more.
Do you think that virtual reality will have a place in pre-visualization?
Yeah, I think it will become a tool, right? Whether it jumps in for the entertainment lighting side, whether it works its way into the drone world, I think there's definitely going to be a place for that in the future.
Yeah. What do you think about Drone Focus Deluxe? It's a military-grade drone that will carry a 100-pound moving light to any position you want overhead. Are you into that?
Well, I got to go to the Night of Illumination Award in Vegas at LDI this year.
Yeah,
and I was there too.
And they had a drone show.
Yeah,
and
on stage.
Yeah, and I've thought about that multiple times. It's you're watching it, and I'm certainly not criticizing the show at all, but you look at that and go, well, okay, how much of this is a bit of a one-trick pony? And because it's just like anything else, you have to continually evolve and you have to continually create new design elements in your presentation. And they did that in the show, right? First it was sort of just shapes and movements, and then it got to representing things like planets in the solar system and rings circling around the planets and things like that. So, you can't rest on the laurels of technology, right? You got to keep pushing it. Now,
being creative.
Yeah, you got to be creative. You got to be a designer, right? You got to be creative. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, these things hauling a bunch of 100-pound lights floating around, it's certainly a bigger scale than what we saw at the KOI Awards. It's certainly a bigger scale.
And probably louder.
Well, no, these are the secret drones that the military uses. They're silent. They're silent drones. But I think it's going to happen, but not with our present moving lights, because they're going to have to be a lot lighter, obviously. But mark my words, I'm telling you guys, it's going to be there. I'm going to make millions on this. Brackley has our last question of the day.
Yes, and I'm going to change it up a little bit. I understand that you have some thoughts about the way young designers are being trained at the university.
I think there's some really great programs that are out there. And, designers need to get a lot of background, right? The art history background, the architecture background. As well as understanding technology, getting thrown into uncomfortable situations. I mean, I was very lucky at UCLA, having gone into grad school after 8 or 9 years of being a professional. I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted. I knew where the holes were in my education that needed to get filled, and I knew the kind of things that I wanted to do. And there were times when it didn't exist within the structure of the program. So I would go to the department chair and say, here's what I'd like to do. And I'll, make sure that, the classwork and all the assignments are covered, but here's something extra that I would like to make happen. And, as long as things were covered, I generally got approved. And it was great because I got to sort of formulate what that is. But one of the things that I did is there was a new play festival, and you wind up doing lighting a new play a week for several weeks. And I would go into each one of those, and I would take a different approach. Like one time I said, I'm going to light the show without gel, right? I'm going to get all the variation in color that I need by varying intensity, using different sources, doubling up where I need to, and just to force myself to think a different way. Then the next production, I forced myself to program without ever calling up a channel's level. I would simply have the operator grab the channel and roll it up and say stop. So I didn't have any numerical overhead in what I was looking at. And it was just a different way of thinking about it. So doing things like that, right? Changing things up. I also think, I remember years ago, I used to do a lot of master classes where I would go in and talk about being a professional in this industry. Because certainly at the time, these programs were, they were teaching the background, they were teaching the art, they were teaching the references, they were teaching the technology, but nobody was talking about contracts. Nobody was talking about working with the unions. Nobody was talking about how do you find an agent and going into the business side of things. Now, I don't know if any of that's changed in the last few years, but I think we're putting a lot of young designers out on the street that don't have a clue how to function on the business side. So do you guys know, has that been dealt with over the years?
Yes, we here at UNLV, we do that. I mean, I think a lot of other schools are doing that as well. They're pushing the reality of, when you get out there, how do you survive?
Well, that's great because it, like I said, it wasn't happening, several years ago, but I'm glad that's been changing.
Yeah. I think a lot depends on who the teacher is. If the teacher is a professional lighting designer, we realize that that's required set of knowledge that students need.
Right.
And also getting them out there, like what Gilbert and other teachers would do, to bring them out into the profession. Talk about contracts and talk about the union and talk about what clauses are in your contracts and things like that. All very, very important. But you were fortunate because you went to both SMU and UCLA where there were professional designers teaching.
Right. And that's one thing that Neil was very good at least with me, is dragging me along and getting me out there. And because sometimes it's not any sort of formal education you get in the field, but it's just you're now having dinner, your meal breaks with the whole different with the production team and and you're learning from them.
Yeah, it's all about networking and connections.
Yeah. My first year after grad school, when I was the assistant lighting designer at the Miami Opera, and I was working with all those amazing designers, I learned more that year than I had learned my previous 7 years in universities.
I used to say the same thing with Neil. Is I would learn more in 3 hours with him in the theater than 3 weeks in the classroom.
Absolutely. Neil was the first person to hire me out of grad school.
I remember you said that. Yeah.
That was a generation of designers that were very generous. And I think that the generation right now is very generous too. I think it's great. We don't really worry about people taking our jobs. We feel that it's our duty to train young designers like we were trained because our mentors were generous as well. Well, Bobby, thanks so much for being here with us today. It was fantastic.
Oh, love catching up with you guys.
Yeah. We never see each other.
Virtually.
Hey, guys, that Hammond organ solo in the background over that great Zach Borvray bass line. Hey, dig that bass line, baby. Tells us that once again, you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. Be sure to follow us on Facebook. You can find us on any of your favorite podcast providers. And be sure to subscribe to Light Talk. That way you won't miss 1 second of crazy Lumen insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast.
And if you litigate, the law firm of Flecht, Flocked, Flare, and Glare and their paralegal Snoot will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Sin City, and the Lone Star State.
And be sure to tune in next week when we discuss the secret lives of lighting designers, the perfect nutcracker, booms versus towers, and are blackouts a mistake?
All that and a new sponsor.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
We'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk. Thanks, Bobby.
Thanks, Bobby.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Toodles.
Light Talk.